The betrayal in my own home. A judge's story. I've lived in this house for 30 years. 30 years of memories, laughter, family dinners, and quiet evenings by the fireplace. But lately, something has changed. There's this feeling, this gnawing, persistent feeling that something is fundamentally wrong. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's there, lurking in every corner, hiding in every shadow. I feel like I'm being watched in my own house. My own sanctuary has become a place of unease, and I don't know why. But I'm going to hang it to find out. You need to understand one thing about me. I'm not the kind of person who jumps to conclusions. I've spent decades on the bench weighing evidence, listening to testimony, separating truth from lies. I've seen the worst of humanity parade through my courtroom. I've heard every excuse, every manipulation, every carefully crafted story designed to deceive. And now I'm starting to wonder if I've been blind to the deception happening right under my own roof. It started with small things, little disruptions that most people would dismiss as nothing. A book moved on my shelf, papers on my desk rearranged just slightly, my reading glasses in a different spot than where I left them. At first, I told myself I was getting older, that my memory wasn't what it used to be. But I'm a judge, damn it. My mind is sharp. I notice details. And these weren't the actions of a forgetful old man. These were signs that someone had been going through my things. The chair in my study was askew one morning, just a few degrees off from where I always position it. The clutter on my desk had been reorganized, but not in the way I organize things. Someone had been in there, looking through my documents, my papers, my personal effects. There was no sign of a break-in, no broken windows, no forced locks, which meant only one thing: someone with a key had been invading my privacy, someone I trusted, someone in my own family. That realization hit me like a freight train. The pain of it was almost physical. I've given everything to this family. I worked myself to the bone to provide for them, to give them opportunities I never had. I put my son Edwin through law school. I helped him and his wife Euphemia buy their first home. And this is how they repay me? By sneaking around behind my back? But I couldn't be sure. Not yet. I needed evidence. I needed proof. And that's when I decided to do something I never thought I'd have to do. I told my family I was going away on vacation, a little trip to clear my head, to get some rest. They seemed almost too eager to help me pack, too enthusiastic about my departure. That should have been my first real clue. But what I uncovered while watching from the shadows, while they thought I was miles away, changed everything I thought I knew about them. Everything. Before we go any further, I need you to understand the magnitude of what I'm about to reveal. Hit that like button if you think something's fishy here, because this is just the beginning of a story that will make your blood run cold. This is about betrayal at its deepest level. Family betraying family, children turning on their parents. And I'm going to expose every sickening detail. Mrs. Carlson knew something. My neighbor of 25 years, the sweet elderly woman who lives next door, she grabbed my hand one day as I was checking my mailbox. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone so frail. Her eyes were urgent, almost desperate. "At midnight," she whispered, her voice trembling. "At midnight, you will see and understand everything I am." Then she shuffled back to her house, leaving me standing there, confused and more unsettled than ever. What did she mean? What happened at midnight? Was she losing her mind? Or did she know something I didn't? Mrs. Carlson had always been sharp as a tack, despite her age. She noticed things. She saw things. And she was trying to warn me about something, something terrible that was happening right under my nose. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The signs were all there: the moved objects, the suspicious behavior, the cryptic warning. I had to know the truth. So I made my plan. I would pretend to leave on my vacation, pack my boys, say my goodbyes, and drive away. But I wouldn't actually go anywhere. I would come back under cover of darkness and watch. I would see what my family did when they thought I was gone. I would catch them in whatever scheme they were plotting. The pain of even contemplating this was excruciating. These were the people I loved most in the world. My son, my daughter-in-law. How could I suspect them of such treachery? But my instincts, honed by decades of reading people, of detecting lies and deception, were screaming at me that something was terribly, horribly wrong. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something was wrong in your life? That feeling that makes your stomach churn and your heart race? Comment below and let me know if you've ever experienced something like this, because what I was about to discover would confirm my worst fears and then some. The day I left, they helped me carry my bags to the car. Edwin was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. Euphemia hugged me a little too enthusiastically, a little too long. "Have a wonderful time, Dad," Edwin said. "You deserve this vacation. Don't worry about anything here. We'll take care of everything." Those words, "we'll take care of everything." They echoed in my mind as I drove away, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I drove to a hotel across town, checked in under a false name, and waited until nightfall. Then I returned to my neighborhood, parking several blocks away. I made my way back to my house on foot, staying in the shadows, moving carefully. I'm not as young as I used to be, but adrenaline and anger gave me strength. I had installed security cameras in my house years ago, and I could access them remotely from my phone. But I wanted to be there in person. I wanted to see with my own eyes what they would do. I decided to stay and watch. Yeah, I needed to see what they would do when they thought I was far away, when they believed they were safe from my scrutiny. I found a vantage point in my own backyard, hidden behind the old oak tree that I'd planted when Edwin was just a boy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Hiding in the shadows of my own property, spying on my own family, the tree I'd nurtured and watched grow, now providing cover as I watched my son betray me. The house was dark except for a light in the kitchen. I could see movement inside. Edwin and Euphemia were there, and they weren't alone. Through the window, I saw them talking animatedly with someone I didn't recognize, a stranger in my house. The anger started to build in my chest, hot and fierce. Who was this person? What were they doing in my home? I overheard them talking, but every time one of them glanced toward the window, their voices dropped lower. Their gestures became more furtive. They were being careful, cautious. They knew they were doing something wrong, something they needed to hide. And that knowledge sent waves of pain and rage through me in equal measure. I watched for hours that first night. They didn't do anything overtly suspicious, but the atmosphere was wrong, the energy was wrong. Edwin and Euphemia kept looking around nervously, as if expecting me to walk through the door at any moment. The stranger, a man in his 40s wearing an expensive suit, seemed to be explaining something to them, showing them papers, pointing at documents I couldn't quite see from my position. When they finally left around 11 o'clock, I waited another hour before slipping back to my hotel. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My mind was racing with possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. What were they planning? What were those documents? Who was that man in the suit? The next evening, I returned to my watching post, and that's when things started to become clearer. Edwin came back to the house around 6 o'clock, alone this time. He went straight to my study, my private sanctuary. Through the window, I watched him open my desk drawers, pull out files, photograph documents with his phone. My own son, going through my personal papers like a common thief. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could. Then Euphemia arrived with groceries. They made dinner in my kitchen, using my food, drinking my wine. They were so comfortable, so casual about being in my house without me. And their conversation, I could only catch pieces of it through the window, but what I heard made my blood boil. "He'll never know. We just need to wait a little longer. The old man won't suspect a thing." The old man, that's what they called me. Not dad, not father. The old man. Ever had a gut punch like that in a conversation? When someone you love reveals what they really think of you, drop a comment and let me know what you do in this situation, because I was torn between confronting them immediately and continuing to gather evidence. And I chose evidence. Because I'm a judge. I know that emotions don't win cases. Facts do. During one of my surveillance sessions, I managed to get close enough to the dining room window to hear their conversation more clearly. Edwin was on the phone with someone, and I heard him say, "Dad, have you updated your will recently?" That was when I realized they had been planning this for a while. They had been asking me subtle questions about my estate, my assets, my plans for the future. Questions I'd answered honestly because I had no reason to suspect their motives. The words stung more than I thought they would. Something wasn't right. Everything wasn't right. Each night I returned to watch. Each night the picture became clearer and more painful. They were going through my entire house, cataloging my possessions, photographing my documents. The stranger in the suit came back several times. I started taking my own photographs, documenting their every move. I recorded conversations through the window. I gathered evidence the way I'd taught young lawyers to do for decades. Methodically, thoroughly, irrefutably. Mrs. Carlson's words kept echoing in my mind. At midnight, you will see and understand everything. I had been watching at various times, but I hadn't specifically watched at midnight. So on the fifth night of my surveillance, I made sure to be in position at 11:30, hidden behind my oak tree, camera ready, phone recording. Midnight approached. The house was dark. I thought maybe nothing would happen, that Mrs. Carlson had been mistaken or confused. But then, at 11:55, a car pulled up to my house. Edwin and Euphemia got out. They were followed by the man in the suit, and they were carrying briefcases and folders. They let themselves in with Edwin's key, a key I'd given him years ago for emergencies, never imagining he'd use it like this. Midnight struck. It was time. My heartbeat quickened as I saw Edwin, Euphemia, and the stranger enter my house and sit at my dining table. My dining table, where we'd shared countless family meals, where I'd celebrated Edwin's birthdays, where we'd mourned the loss of my wife, and now they were using it as a staging ground for their betrayal. The lights came on, they spread papers across the table, and I moved closer, pressing myself against the side of the house, my phone camera aimed at the dining room window. I could hear them clearly now. The man in the suit was a real estate agent. A real estate agent. They were discussing my property, my house, the house I'd bought with my own money, that I'd filled with memories, that I'd planned to leave to Edwin in my will. They were planning to sell it. But how? I was still alive. This was still my house. How could they possibly sell my property? That's when I saw the documents. Through the window, I watched as the real estate agent spread papers across my dining table. I zoomed in with my phone camera, and my blood turned to ice. They were forged documents, deeds, power of attorney papers, transfer documents, all with my signature, or rather, a very good forgery of my signature. I saw them, my own family, discussing paperwork I never signed, planning to sell my house, to steal my assets, to rob me of everything I'd worked for, without my consent, without my knowledge. While I was supposedly on vacation, trusting them to take care of everything, the real estate agent was explaining the process to them. With these documents, he said, we can list the property immediately. Once it sells, the proceeds will be transferred to the account we discussed. By the time he returns from vacation and realizes what's happened, it will be too late to stop the sale. The paperwork will all be in order. Edwin nodded, his face serious. And you're sure this will work? You're sure he can't challenge it? The real estate agent smiled, a cold, calculating smile. I've done this before. As long as the documents look legitimate, by the time anyone questions them, the transaction will be complete. Your father would have to prove fraud, which would take months, maybe years in court. And given his age, well, the stress alone might be enough to... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The implication was clear. They were counting on the stress of fighting this to kill me. My own son, planning my death, hoping the betrayal would be too much for my heart to bear. If this betrayal makes your blood boil, give this video a like. Let's see if we can hit 500 likes for all the people who've been hurt by their own family, who understand the special kind of pain that comes from being stabbed in the back by the people you love most. Euphemia spoke up then, her voice cold and businesslike. What about his other assets? The investments? The savings accounts? Can we access those too? One thing at a time, the real estate agent said. The house first. Once that's done, we can move on to the rest. But we need to act quickly, while he's away. Edwin leaned back in his chair, my chair, at my table in my house. I just want this over with, he said. I've waited long enough. He's had his time. Now it's my turn. The pain of hearing those words from my son's mouth was indescribable. I've sent criminals to prison for decades, heard confessions of terrible crimes, witnessed the darkest aspects of human nature. But nothing prepared me for the agony of hearing my own child plotting to rob me, to destroy me, to essentially wish me dead so he could inherit what I'd built. I had to grip the side of the house to stay standing. Tears were streaming down my face, but I kept recording. I kept documenting because evidence doesn't lie. And I needed every piece of this recorded. They continued talking for another hour. They discussed listing prices, potential buyers, how to handle any questions that might arise. They talked about my belongings, what they would keep, what they would sell, what they would throw away. They cataloged my life like I was already dead, like I was nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle standing between them and their inheritance. When they finally left around 1:30 in the morning, I sat in my backyard for a long time, just trying to process what I'd witnessed. The betrayal was complete. There was no misunderstanding, no innocent explanation. My son and his wife were trying to steal everything from me, and they had enlisted a criminal real estate agent to help them do it. I pretended to leave, but I was still here, watching, planning, building my case without them knowing, gathering every shred of evidence I would need to bring them to justice. Because that's what this was about now, not just exposing their betrayal, but making sure they faced the full consequences of their actions. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost in my own life. I continued my surveillance, documenting everything. I photographed the forged documents through the window. I recorded their conversations. I tracked their meetings with the real estate agent. I made copies of everything on my phone and uploaded them to secure cloud storage. I contacted a private investigator I'd worked with during my years on the bench, someone I trusted completely, and had him verify everything I'd found. The evidence was overwhelming. The forged signatures, the conspiracy to commit fraud, the plans to sell my property illegally, the real estate agent's admission that he'd done this before, which suggested a pattern of elder abuse and fraud that went beyond just my case. I had enough to send all three of them to prison for years. But gathering evidence wasn't enough. I needed to understand why. Why would Edwin do this? I'd given him everything. I'd loved him, supported him, believed in him. Where had I gone wrong? What had I done to make him hate me enough to betray me like this? I thought back over the years, searching for clues. Edwin had always been ambitious, maybe too ambitious. He'd wanted to make partner at his law firm, but it hadn't happened. He'd made some investments that went bad. I'd bailed him out more than once, never asking for repayment because he was my son. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe I'd enabled him. Maybe I'd made it too easy for him to see me as a source of money rather than as a father. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? Hit the like button if you think I'm playing my cards the right way, because I was about to make a move that would change everything, and I needed to know I wasn't crazy, that my anger and pain were justified. They thought I was gone, but I was right here, documenting every move, watching their every word, building an ironclad case against them. They grew more confident as the days passed. The real estate agent brought photographers to take pictures of the house for the listing. Edwin and Euphemia started looking at property listings for themselves, bigger houses, nicer neighborhoods. They were already spending my money in their minds, already living the life they would have once they'd stolen everything from me. The rage I felt was consuming. I'm not a violent man. I've always believed in the rule of law, in justice served through proper channels. But watching them celebrate their planned theft of my life's work, I understood for the first time why people take justice into their own hands. The temptation to confront them violently, to make them feel even a fraction of the pain they'd caused me, was almost overwhelming. But I resisted, because I'm better than that, because I've spent my entire career proving that the law works, that justice can be served through proper channels, and because I wanted them to suffer the way they'd made me suffer, slowly, completely, with the full weight of the system coming down on them. After 2 weeks of surveillance, I had everything I needed. The evidence was irrefutable. The case was airtight. It was time to return home and face them at what they'd done. I'm back, And now I'm going to show them what happens when you mess with a judge, when you betray the person who gave you everything, when you mistake kindness for weakness. I've got everything I need. I planned my return carefully. I wanted maximum impact. I wanted them to feel the full weight of their exposure. So I arranged for my private investigator to be there, along with a lawyer I trusted, and two police officers who'd worked cases in my courtroom. This wasn't just going to be a family confrontation. This was going to be an arrest. I arrived home on a Tuesday afternoon, pulling into my driveway like I'd done thousands of times before. But this time was different. This time I knew the truth. This time I was carrying evidence of their betrayal in my briefcase. The private investigator's car was parked down the street. The lawyer was waiting in his car around the corner. The police were on standby, ready to move when I gave them the signal. Edwin and Euphemia's car was in my driveway. They were inside my house, probably going through my things again, probably planning their next move. I let myself in with my key, and the look on their faces when I walked through the door was almost worth the pain they'd caused me. Almost. "Dad!" Edwin stood up from my couch, his face pale. "We weren't expecting you back yet. How was your vacation?" "Enlightening," I said, setting my briefcase down on the entry table. "Very enlightening. I learned a lot about a lot of things. About betrayal, about fraud, about family." Euphemia's eyes darted to Edwin. I could see the panic starting to set in. They knew something was wrong, but they didn't know how much I knew. Not yet. "Is everything okay?" Edwin asked, and I almost laughed at the audacity of the question. Was everything okay? My son was trying to steal my house, and he was asking if everything was okay. They never saw it coming. When I opened my briefcase and showed them the pictures, the timestamps, the documentation, the recordings of their conversations, their faces went pale. All the color drained from their skin. Edwin's hands started shaking. Euphemia sat down heavily, looking like she might be sick. "Dad, I can explain," Edwin started, but I held up my hand. "No," I said, and my voice was cold, harder than I'd ever heard it. "You can't explain this. You can't explain away fraud. You can't explain away forgery. You can't explain away conspiracy to steal my property. You can't explain away plotting my financial destruction. Do you think I should confront them now? Leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts on how this should play out. Because what happened next was the culmination of weeks of pain and anger and betrayal, and I want you to understand the full impact of what I did. I spread the evidence across my dining room table, the same table where they'd plotted with the real estate agent, the photographs of the forged documents, the recordings of their conversations, the timeline of their actions, the proof of their conspiracy. It was all there laid out like a prosecutor's case, because that's exactly what it was. "I have recordings of you discussing the sale of my house," I said. "I have photographs of forged documents with my signature. I have evidence of your meetings with a real estate agent who specializes in elder fraud. I have witnesses who can testify to your actions. I have enough evidence to send both of you to prison for years." Edwin was crying now, actual tears running down his face. "Dad, please, I'm sorry. We needed the money. The firm is laying people off. We're drowning in debt. You thought you'd steal from me," I interrupted. "You thought you'd forge my signature and sell my house out from under me. You thought you'd destroy everything I've built because you can't manage your own finances. You thought you'd betray your own father because you're weak and greedy and entitled." The words came out like venom. All the pain, all the anger, all the betrayal I'd been holding back for weeks poured out. I wanted them to feel it. I wanted them to understand the magnitude of what they'd done. Euphemia found her voice. "We never meant for it to go this far. The real estate agent, he said it would be easy. He said people do it all the time. He said what you wanted to hear," I said. "And you believed him because you wanted to believe him. Because you wanted my money more than you wanted a relationship with me. Because you saw me as an asset to be liquidated rather than a person to be loved." The pain in my chest was physical. I could barely breathe. These were the people I devoted my life to. This was my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised and nurtured and supported through everything. and he'd tried to destroy me. This isn't over yet. I've got the proof. Now it's time to make them pay for what they've done, to ensure that justice is served, to show them that actions have consequences, because that's what the law is about, consequences. I picked up my phone and made the call. Within minutes, the police were at my door. The private investigator came in with additional evidence he'd gathered. My lawyer arrived with paperwork already prepared. Edwin and Euphemia were read their rights. They were handcuffed in my living room, in the house they'd tried to steal, while I watched with a mixture of satisfaction and soul-crushing sadness. "You can't do this," Edwin said, as the officers led him toward the door. "I'm your son. You're really going to have me arrested?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and I barely recognized the person standing there. This wasn't the boy I'd raised. This wasn't the son I'd loved. This was a criminal who happened to share my DNA. "You're not my son," I said, and the words felt like they were ripping my heart out. My son wouldn't have done this. My son wouldn't have betrayed me. My son would have come to me if he needed help, not tried to rob me. "You're a stranger wearing my son's face, and I want you out of my house." The look on his face will haunt me forever. The realization that he'd destroyed our relationship irrevocably. The understanding that there was no going back from this, no forgiveness, no reconciliation. He'd made his choice, and now he had to live with the consequences. They took him away. They took Euphemia away. And I stood in my house that I'd almost lost, my home that they'd tried to steal, and I felt empty. Victorious but empty. I'd won, but what had I won? I'd exposed their betrayal, but I'd lost my family in the process. The real estate agent was arrested the next day. My private investigator had found evidence of at least 6 other cases where he'd helped families defraud elderly relatives. He was looking at serious prison time. Edwin and Euphemia were charged with fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Their lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but I refused. I wanted this to go to trial. I wanted everything exposed in open court. I wanted the whole world to know what they'd done. If you want to see how this ends, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications. Trust me, this is only the beginning of a story that gets even more complicated, because the legal proceedings revealed things about my family that I'd never known. Secrets that went back years, patterns of deception that made this betrayal seem like just the tip of the iceberg. The preliminary hearing was set for 6 weeks after their arrest. During that time, I went through my entire house, looking for anything they might have taken or tampered with. I found more forged documents hidden in Edwin's old bedroom, power of attorney forms, healthcare directives, even a forged will that left everything to him immediately upon my death. They'd been planning this for at least a year, maybe longer. I also found letters between Edwin and Euphemia discussing me in the most heartless terms, how I was getting in the way of their future, how I was holding on to assets I didn't need, how my death would solve all their problems. Reading those letters was like being stabbed repeatedly. Each word was a fresh wound, a new betrayal. The thing about pain like this is that it doesn't fade. It doesn't get better with time. Every morning I wake up and remember what my son tried to do to me. Every night I lie in bed and wonder where I went wrong as a father. What could I have done differently? How did I raise a child capable of such betrayal? But then I remember that this isn't about me. This isn't my failure. Edwin made his choices. He chose greed over love. He chose theft over honesty. He chose to see me as an obstacle rather than as a father. Those were his choices, not mine. I didn't make him into a criminal. He did that all by himself. The trial began 3 months after the arrest. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They had my surveillance footage, the recordings, the photographs, the testimony of the private investigator, the expert analysis of the forged documents, and the confession of the real estate agent, who'd agreed to testify against Edwin and Euphemia in exchange for a reduced sentence. I sat in the courtroom, not on the bench where I'd spent decades, but in the gallery, watching as my son's life was dissected and examined. The prosecutor laid out the evidence methodically, piece by piece, building an unshakable case. Edwin's lawyer tried to paint him as a desperate man, driven to extreme measures by financial pressure, but it didn't work. The jury saw through it. They saw what I'd seen, a calculating betrayal, carefully planned and deliberately executed. Euphemia's lawyer tried a different tack, claiming she'd been manipulated by Edwin, that she was a victim too. But the recordings proved otherwise. She'd been an equal partner in this scheme, sometimes even the driving force. The jury didn't buy her innocent act either. I've done all I can. The pieces are in place. Now I'll show them what happens when you underestimate a judge. When you forget that the person you're betraying spent 40 years mastering the legal system, when you assume that age equals weakness. The verdict came back after 3 days of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Edwin showed no emotion as the jury foreman read the verdict, but Euphemia broke down crying. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a hollow emptiness where my family used to be. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. The prosecutor asked for the maximum sentence, 10 years for Edwin, 8 years for Euphemia. Their lawyers pleaded for leniency, arguing that they were first-time offenders, that they'd shown remorse, that prison would destroy their lives. I almost laughed at that last argument. They were worried about their lives being destroyed? What did they think they'd been trying to do to me? The judge, a colleague I'd worked with for years, looked at them with barely concealed disgust. Elder fraud, he said, is one of the most despicable crimes in our legal system. It represents a complete betrayal of trust, a violation of the most fundamental bonds of family and society. You didn't just steal from a stranger. You stole from your own father. You forged his documents. You plotted to deprive him of his home, his security, his peace of mind. And you did it all while smiling to his face and pretending to care about him. He sentenced Edwin to 8 years in prison. Euphemia got 6 years. They were also ordered to pay restitution, though what money they had left after legal fees, I didn't know. They were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Edwin looked at me once as they took him away, and I saw something in his eyes. Regret, hatred, shame, I couldn't tell. And honestly, I didn't care anymore. The real estate agent got 12 years. He'd been convicted of multiple counts of fraud spanning several years and several victims. At least some good came out of this nightmare. Other families were spared the same betrayal because he was finally brought to justice, but the victory felt hollow. I went home to my house, the house I'd saved, the house I'd fought for, and it felt empty. Every room reminded me of what I'd lost. Edwin's childhood bedroom, where I'd read him stories and helped him with homework. The kitchen, where we'd cook together. The living room, where we'd watch movies and celebrated holidays. All of it tainted now by the knowledge of his betrayal. People ask me if I regret pursuing the case so aggressively. They ask if I wish I'd tried to work things out privately, within the family. They ask if I think I was too harsh, too unforgiving. And my answer is always the same. No, I don't regret it. Not for a second. What Edwin and Euphemia did wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, premeditated attempt to rob me of everything I'd worked for. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew it was wrong. And they did it anyway because they thought they could get away with it. They thought I was too old, too trusting, too weak to fight back. They were wrong, and they paid the price for their miscalculation. But the price I paid was steep too. I lost my son. I lost my daughter-in-law. I lost the future I'd imagined. Grandchildren, family gatherings, growing old surrounded by loved ones. All of that is gone now, destroyed by greed and betrayal. Mrs. Carlson came to visit me a few weeks after the trial ended. She brought cookies and tea, like she always does. We sat in my living room and she didn't say much at first, just sat there with me in companionable silence. Finally, she spoke. "I'm sorry you had to go through this," she said. "I saw what they were doing. I tried to warn you." "You did warn me," I said. "Your midnight warning gave me the clue I needed. I owe you a debt of gratitude." She shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. I just I wish families didn't do this to each other. I wish children appreciated their parents while they're still alive." We sat in silence for a while longer. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Do you think you'll ever forgive him?" I thought about it, really thought about it. Forgiveness is supposed to be healing, liberating. It's supposed to free you from the burden of anger and pain. But how do you forgive someone for something like this? How do you forgive your own child for trying to destroy you? I don't know, I answered honestly. Maybe someday, but not today. Not anytime soon. The wound is too fresh. The pain is too deep. She nodded, understanding. You did the right thing, she said. You stood up for yourself. You didn't let them get away with it. That takes courage. Courage. I suppose it does take courage to prosecute your own son, to put justice above family loyalty. But it didn't feel brave. It felt necessary. It felt like survival. The months since the trial have been difficult. I've had to rebuild my life without the family I thought I had. I've had to come to terms with the fact that the son I raised exists only in my memories, not in reality. The real Edwin, the one who tried to rob me, is a stranger I never really knew. I've thrown myself into my work. Even though I'm retired from the bench, I still consult on legal cases, mentor young lawyers, write articles for legal journals. Keeping busy helps. It keeps my mind occupied, keeps me from dwelling too much on what I've lost. But the nights are hard. The nights when I'm alone in this house, when the silence is overwhelming, when I remember what it was like to have a family. Those nights, the pain is almost unbearable. I sit in my study, surrounded by my books and my memories. And I wonder if the price of justice was too high. But then I remember the alternative. If I'd done nothing, if I'd let them get away with it, they would have stolen my house. They would have taken everything I worked for. And they would have moved on to their next scheme, their next betrayal. By stopping them, by exposing them, by ensuring they faced consequences, I protected not just myself, but potentially other victims in the future. Edwin writes to me from prison occasionally, letters claiming he's sorry, that he's realized the error of his ways, that he wants to make amends. I read them, but I don't respond. Words are cheap. Actions matter. And his actions spoke louder than any apology ever could. Euphemia's parents reached out to me, asking me to drop the charges, to show mercy. They're good people, and I feel sorry for them. They didn't raise their daughter to be a criminal any more than I raised my son to be one. But I couldn't drop the charges. Justice doesn't work that way. Once the wheels are in motion, once the evidence is presented, once the verdict is rendered, you can't just undo it because it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. I've had time to reflect on everything that happened, time to think about the warning signs I missed, the red flags I ignored. Edwin had always been somewhat entitled, always expected things to come easily to him. I'd indulged him too much, perhaps, given him too much without requiring enough effort in return. Maybe I'd set him up for this fall by making everything too easy. Or maybe that's just me trying to take responsibility for his choices, trying to find some way to make sense of senseless betrayal. The truth is, I'll probably never fully understand why he did what he did. I'll never know at what point he decided that stealing from me was acceptable, that betraying me was justified. What I do know is that I survived. I fought back. I stood up for myself. And in doing that, I reclaimed not just my house, but my dignity, my self-respect, my sense of justice. They tried to make me a victim, but I refused that role. I became the prosecutor instead, the judge, the jury. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness to this pain, this betrayal, this journey through the darkest valley of family treachery. I hope my story serves as a warning to others. Pay attention to the signs. Trust your instincts. Don't let love blind you to reality. And if you're ever betrayed by those closest to you, remember that you have the right to fight back, to seek justice, to protect yourself. The law exists to protect the vulnerable from the predatory, even when the predators are your own family, especially when they're your own family, because that's when the betrayal cuts deepest and the need for justice is most profound. I'm still here, in my house, living my life. Edwin and Euphemia are in prison, paying for their crimes. The real estate agent is behind bars, unable to prey on any more elderly victims. Justice was served. The system worked. But I can't say I feel victorious. I feel exhausted, heartbroken, and profoundly alone. This is my story. This is what happens when family betrays family, when greed triumphs over love, when children forget that their parents are human beings deserving of respect and dignity. This is the price of betrayal, paid by both the betrayer and the betrayed. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it's this. Never underestimate the person you're betraying, because you never know who they really are, what resources they have, what lengths they'll go to in order to protect themselves. My family underestimated a judge, and they're paying for that mistake with years of their lives. Justice, like betrayal, comes with a price. We all pay it in the end. If you've made it this far, then you're just as invested in this story as I am. Don't miss out on what happens next. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with anyone who loves a good twist. You won't want to miss the next chapter in this wild ride. Thanks for watching. If you've learned something today, or if this story shocked you, leave a comment below. I read and respond to every single one. And remember, sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, but the justice that follows, that's what we all deserve. Until next time, stay aware, stay alert, and remember, the truth always finds a way to the surface.